13:48. You wake up with a headache. By sunset, black lumps the size of eggs are pushing out of your groin. By morning, you're probably dead. That was just how it went. No medicine, no answers. Half of Europe wiped out in 3 years. Here's what surviving the bubonic plague actually looked like. If you're settling in for the night, maybe getting comfortable under your blankets, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always like knowing who's out there in the dark with me, learning about history. All right, let's do this. You're lying in a warm bed right now. Soft pillow, clean sheets, temperature-controlled room, probably. Maybe you've got a phone nearby, some water, snacks if you want them. The biggest threat to your sleep tonight is probably your own racing thoughts. Or that weird sound your neighbour's cat makes at 2 a.m. So let me take you somewhere else entirely. The year is 1348. It's late June, and you are a peasant farmer named William, living in a small village about 10 miles east of Bristol, England. You're 27 years old, which makes you middle-aged by the standards of your time. You've got a wife named Agnes, a 4-year-old daughter named Mary, and a strip of land that your family has worked for 3 generations. Your day starts before the sun does. You don't have an alarm clock. You don't need one. Your body wakes when the first grey light seeps through the gaps in your cottage walls. There's no glass in your windows, just wooden shutters that you keep closed at night to keep out the chill and whatever might be prowling around in the darkness. Wolves are still a real concern out here. So are thieves. So are worse things that you try not to think about. The first thing you notice when you wake up is the smell. It's not a bad smell exactly, just present, always present. You're so used to it that you barely register it anymore. Wood smoke from last night's fire that's been smouldering in the central hearth. The earthy musk of the thatched roof above your head, made from bundles of dried straw that leak when it rains hard. The warm animal scent from your 2 pigs and handful of chickens that share the other end of your single-room cottage. Yeah, you sleep about 15 feet from your livestock. There's a low wattle fence separating your sleeping area from theirs, but that's it. In winter, you're actually grateful for their body heat. The floor beneath you is packed earth. Your bed is a wooden frame stuffed with straw that you replace every few months when it gets too flattened, or infested with things you'd rather not think about. There's a rough woolen blanket over you that Agnes wove herself. It scratches against your skin, but you've never known anything different. This is luxury, compared to what some folks have. You sit up slowly. Your back aches from yesterday's work in the fields. Reaping season is coming, and there's been a lot of preparation. Sharpening tools, checking the grain, praying the weather holds. Always praying. Prayer is woven into everything you do. You cross yourself as your feet touch the cold floor. Thank God for another night survived, another morning granted. Agnes is already up. You can hear her outside, feeding the chickens. She's been awake for probably half an hour, which means she let you sleep in a little. The reaping will be brutal this year, and she knows you need the rest. Mary is still curled up in her little pallet near the fire pit, her small chest rising and falling. 4 years old, and she's already helping with small tasks, carrying water, gathering eggs, learning to be useful, because in this world, everyone needs to be useful from the moment they can walk. You pull on your clothes. You've got 2 outfits. The one you're wearing now, a rough linen tunic that falls to your knees, held at the waist with a leather belt. Woolen stockings that are more patches than original fabric at this point. Leather shoes that you made yourself and that leak in wet weather. Your other outfit is basically the same but slightly less worn. That one's for Sundays. For church. For the occasions when you want to look like you're not one harvest away from starving. Which honestly, you kind of are. Always. That's the thing about this life that people in your time don't talk about much because it's just how things are. You're always about one bad season away from real trouble. Last year's harvest was decent. The year before that was rough. The year before that, the rains came too heavy and half the grain rotted in the fields. That winter, you ate things you'd rather forget. Bark bread. A rat that got into your grain stores and died there, so you figured, why waste the meat? You survived. Lots of people didn't. The Great Famine was only 30 years ago. Your parents lived through it, talked about it sometimes, late at night, when the fire was low and the memories came crawling back. The rains that wouldn't stop, the crops that drowned in the fields, the animals that starved because there was no fodder, the people that starved because there was no food. Your mother's sister ate her own shoe leather. A cousin, they said, was taken by something worse. Cannibalism, though nobody used that word. Just, he disappeared, and there were whispers. So yeah, you don't take food for granted. Ever. When you eat your breakfast this morning, a chunk of dark rye bread that Agnes baked 2 days ago, and some watery ale that tastes vaguely sour, you eat slowly. You chew thoroughly. You're grateful for every bite, because you know how quickly it can all go away. The ale, by the way, is safer to drink than the water. The water from the stream runs past the village's waste pit, and while you don't understand why exactly, you've noticed that people who drink too much of it tend to get sick. So ale it is. Weak ale for breakfast, slightly stronger ale for supper. You're not drunk. The alcohol content is so low it barely registers, but it's hydrating, and it doesn't give you the flux the way the stream water sometimes does. After breakfast, you head out to the fields. The village is already awake. About 40 families live here, scattered across maybe a dozen cottages of varying sizes. Your lord, Sir Richard Blackwood, owns all of it. The land, the cottages, the tools, the grain, the lives of everyone who works here. You're a villain, which means you're not exactly a slave, but you're not exactly free either. You can't leave without Sir Richard's permission. You can't marry without Sir Richard's permission. You have to work his fields 3 days a week for free, and the other days you work your own strip of land, trying to grow enough to feed your family and still have surplus to sell at market for the coins you need to buy the things you can't make yourself. It's not a bad life, honestly. You've never known anything else. Sir Richard is neither cruel nor kind. He takes his share and leaves you to manage the rest. Some lords are worse, much worse. You've heard stories from travellers who pass through. Lords who beat their peasants, who take their daughters, who work them literally to death and feel nothing about it. Sir Richard mostly ignores you, which is about the best you can hope for. The walk to the fields takes about 15 minutes. Past the church, a stone building that's the largest structure in the village and the pride of the community. Past the mill, where you bring your grain to be ground, paying a fee to the lord for the privilege. Past the forge, where old Geoffrey hammers out tools and fixes whatever needs fixing. Past the village green, where the children play and the women gather to gossip and the men meet to discuss whatever needs discussing. Everyone you pass, you greet by name. They greet you back. You've known these people your entire life. You were born here. You'll die here, God willing. Your grandparents were born and died in this same village. Your great-grandparents too, going back as far as anyone can remember. This land is in your blood. These people are your people. Not friends exactly, though some of them are that too. More like extended family. You've seen them at their worst and their best. You've helped bury their dead and celebrate their weddings. You've shared food when times were hard and received food in return when you were the one struggling. It's a good community. Tight-knit, supportive. The kind of place where if your cottage catches fire, everyone shows up with buckets. The kind of place where if someone's sick, the neighbours take turns bringing food and watching the children. The kind of place where disputes get settled by the whole village, not just by individual families. You have courts for that. Manor courts, held every few weeks in the church, where the reeve and the most respected men of the village hear grievances and settle conflicts. It's not perfect justice, but it's something. The fields are laid out in the open field system, long strips of land, each one belonging to a different family. arranged side by side across rolling hills. Your strip is narrow but long, about half an acre in total, and this year you've got wheat growing on most of it, with a small section set aside for beans and peas. The wheat is coming along nicely, golden heads nodding in the morning breeze. If the weather holds for another month, you'll have a good harvest, maybe even a great one. You spend the morning weeding. It's back-breaking work. Bend, pull, straighten, move forward, bend again, hour after hour. The sun climbs higher and the heat builds. Sweat soaks through your tunic. Your hands, already calloused from years of this work, develop new blisters anyway. You ignore them. Everyone has blisters. Everyone has aches. That's just life. Around midday, Agnes brings you food. More bread, this time with a bit of cheese that she bargained for at last week's market. A small beer to wash it down. You sit together in the shade of an old oak tree at the edge of the field and watch Mary play among the wheat stalks, her laughter carrying across the quiet landscape. This is as close to peace as your world gets. Full belly, healthy family, crops growing well, sun shining. You don't know it yet, but this is the last summer your village will ever be this full. The last summer you'll hear this many voices, see this many faces, know this many names. By this time next year, half the people you greeted this morning will be dead. The fields will lie fallow because there's no one left to work them. The church will be silent because there's no one left to fill the pews. The forge, the mill, the cottages, many of them will stand empty, slowly crumbling back into the earth. But you don't know that yet. None of you do. There have been rumours, of course. There are always rumours. Travellers passing through have mentioned something bad happening far away, across the sea, in places with strange names you've never heard of. Italy, France, somewhere called Sicily, where they say ships arrived carrying nothing but dead men, entire crews wiped out by some kind of sickness. You've heard these stories and you've shrugged them off, the way you shrug off most news from the wider world. What does Sicily have to do with you? What does France matter to your wheat and your family and your village? These are problems for kings and nobles, not for peasants trying to get through another season. Besides, sickness is common. People die all the time, children especially. Agnes has been pregnant 5 times since you married her 8 years ago. 3 of those pregnancies ended in babies that died before their first birthday. 1 ended in a stillbirth. Only Mary has survived, and you thank God for her every single day. While trying not to think too hard about the ones you've lost, that's just how it is. You don't get attached too quickly. You don't name babies until they've survived their first month. You learn to hold grief at arm's length, because if you let it in fully, it would destroy you. So when someone mentions a plague across the sea, you think of the usual ailments, the sweating sickness that comes some summers, the flux that kills the weak, the mysterious fevers that take people without warning and leave the survivors shaken but alive. Bad things happen, people die, God's will, nothing new. You work until the sun starts to drop toward the horizon. Then you gather your tools, call to Agnes and Mary, and head home. Supper is pottage, a thick stew of beans and whatever vegetables Agnes could find, served in a wooden bowl that you eat from while sitting on a rough stool by the fire. Mary has her own smaller bowl. She's chattering about a frog she saw by the stream, demonstrating its hopping with her hands, and Agnes is smiling at her. And you're tired, in the good way that comes from honest labour. And for a few minutes, everything feels right. After supper, Agnes tells you something. She's been to the market in Bristol yesterday with several other village women. A rare trip, but they needed salt and some iron nails and thread, things the village can't produce. While she was there, she heard people talking. The sickness, the one from across the sea. It's closer now. Much closer. A ship came into Weymouth a few weeks ago. No one knows exactly what happened, but the sailors were sick. very sick. And now, people in Weymouth are dying. Not a few, not the weak and the old the way it usually goes. Everyone, young, old, strong, weak, dropping like flies. The market in Bristol was full of fear, people buying extra supplies, people talking about fleeing to the countryside, people praying more openly than usual, crossing themselves at every corner. You listen to this news with a cold feeling in your stomach. Weymouth isn't far, a few days' walk at most. If something's spreading there, it could spread here. Easily. The roads between Bristol and Weymouth are well travelled. Merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, all moving back and forth. If people in Weymouth are sick, people in Bristol will be sick soon. And if people in Bristol are sick... But you don't want to think about that. You can't afford to think about that. There's nothing you can do anyway. You can't flee. Where would you go? You don't have permission to leave, and even if you did, you don't have the money to survive somewhere else. Your life is here. Your land is here. Everything you've ever known is here. So you do what you've always done. You pray. You cross yourself. You pull Agnes close and hold her for a moment longer than usual. You check on Mary, already asleep by the dying fire, her small face peaceful in the flickering light. And you tell yourself that it will be fine. It's always fine. Bad things happen far away, and then they stop happening, and life goes on. Outside, the summer night is warm and quiet, crickets singing, an owl calling somewhere in the darkness. The village is settling into sleep. Dozens of families just like yours, snug in their cottages, unaware that the world is about to change forever. In the morning you'll go back to the fields. You'll weed and water and watch the wheat grow. You'll greet your neighbours and work alongside them and share complaints about the weather and hopes for the harvest. You'll be a medieval peasant doing medieval peasant things, the same things your father did and his father before him, the same things you expect your daughter will do someday. But something is coming. Something is already here, actually, making its way along the roads and the rivers and the coastline, carried by fleas on the backs of rats, carried by people who don't know they're infected yet, carried in the cargo holds of ships and the folds of clothing and the very breath of the dying. It moves about 1.5 miles per day, the historians will later calculate. Slow, but unstoppable. A creeping wave of death that's been building for years, that started somewhere far away in the steppes of Asia, that's already devastated Constantinople and Sicily, and is now chewing through France like a fire through dry timber. The Black Death is coming, and it will find you. But for now, for tonight, in late June of 1348, you sleep. You dream of wheat fields and sunshine and your daughter's laughter. You rest your tired body against the straw mattress and let the darkness take you. Outside, the stars wheel overhead, indifferent to the fates of men. The same stars that have watched empires rise and fall, that have seen 100,000 summer nights just like this one. Tomorrow will be another day of work, another day of survival, another day of the only life you've ever known. And somewhere to the south, in a port town called Weymouth, bodies are being loaded onto carts faster than the gravediggers can dig. Church bells are ringing so constantly that people have started ignoring them. And the sickness, the terrible sickness that no one understands and no one can stop, is beginning to spread. But you don't know that yet. So sleep. Rest. Let the warm summer night wrap around you like a blanket. Feel your wife breathing beside you, your daughter safe in her pallet, your animals shifting quietly on the other side of the room. This is your world, small and simple and hard, but yours. Enjoy it while it lasts. 3 weeks pass. The wheat keeps growing, the rumours keep spreading, and every day, the news from the outside world gets a little bit worse. It's the 2nd week of August now, and the heat has settled over the land like a wet blanket. The kind of heat that makes you dizzy if you work too long in the fields. the kind of heat that turns everything sluggish and slow. Even the animals seem to know something's wrong. Your pigs, usually noisy and demanding, have been quiet lately. The chickens aren't laying as well as they should. Old Geoffrey at the forge says it's the weather. Says he's seen summers like this before, where the air gets thick and strange and puts everyone on edge. But you don't think it's just the weather. A man named Robert from your village went to Bristol last week. He's a freeman, one of the few in your community who can come and go as he pleases. He has a cousin there who works as a tanner, and he wanted to check on him, bring him some smoked meat from the last pig slaughter. Robert is a good man, steady, not the type to exaggerate or get caught up in panic. When Robert came back 4 days ago, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. You were in the fields when he rode past on his old mare. You saw him from a distance, slumped in the saddle, and something about the way he moved made you put down your scythe and walk to the road. Other men did the same. By the time Robert reached the village green, there were maybe 15 of you gathered there, waiting. He didn't say anything at first, just sat on his horse, staring at nothing. Then, he started talking, and once he started, he couldn't stop. Bristol is dying. That's how he put it. Not sick, not struggling, dying. The sickness that was in Weymouth has spread there, and it's worse than anyone imagined. People are dropping in the streets, not just the poor, not just the weak, everyone. A healthy man can wake up with a headache in the morning and be dead by nightfall, sometimes faster. Robert said he saw a woman collapse in the middle of the market square, just fell down like someone had cut her strings, and within an hour she was gone. Her body lay there for most of the day because nobody wanted to touch her. Nobody knew what to do. The symptoms, Robert said, are like nothing he's ever seen. First comes a fever, burning hot, so hot that people strip off their clothes and beg for water. Then the sweating starts, a cold sweat that soaks through everything. And then, usually within a day or two, the swellings appear. Under the arms, along the neck, in the groin, lumps the size of eggs, sometimes bigger, that turn from red to purple to black. When they burst, the smell is unbearable. Some people say the swellings are filled with something rotten, like the corruption has taken root in the very flesh. Robert's cousin is dead. The whole tannery district is dead. The bishop has fled. The mayor has fled. Anyone with money or connections has left Bristol, heading to country estates or distant relatives, trying to outrun what's coming. But the people who can't leave, the ordinary people, they're trapped. The churches are packed with the sick and the dying. The graveyards are full. They've started digging pits outside the city walls, mass graves where they dump the bodies as fast as they can. And the smell. Robert kept coming back to that. The smell of a dying city. You listen to all of this with a cold knot in your stomach. Around you, the other men were silent. Some of them crossed themselves. Some of them looked like they might be sick. Old Walter, who's been farming these fields since before you were born, actually turned and walked away in the middle of Robert's story. Just walked back to his cottage and didn't come out for the rest of the day. That night, the village held a meeting in the church. Father Edmund, your parish priest, led prayers for deliverance. Long prayers, desperate prayers, the kind of prayers you say when you're not sure if God is listening anymore. The whole village was there, crammed into the small stone building, faces lit by candlelight, everyone looking to Father Edmund for some kind of answer. Father Edmund is a decent man. He's been your priest for 12 years, ever since old Father William died. He's not particularly clever or inspiring, but he's sincere. He believes what he preaches. And what he preaches now is that this sickness is a punishment from God, that the sins of mankind have grown so great that the Lord has sent a pestilence to cleanse the world, that the only hope is repentance, prayer, fasting, confession. So you pray, you fast, you confess your sins, though honestly, your sins are pretty mild. You've cursed when you stubbed your toe. You've envied your neighbour's better wheat. You've had impure thoughts about the miller's daughter, but who hasn't? These seem like small things compared to what's happening. But Father Edmund says that all sins add to the weight that humanity must bear. Every curse, every envy, every lustful thought, they all count. The village decides to close itself off. No travellers will be allowed in. Anyone who leaves must quarantine themselves for a week before they can return. The men take turns watching the roads, turning away merchants and pilgrims and anyone else who might bring the sickness with them. It feels wrong, this hostility to strangers, this breaking of the basic rules of hospitality that your faith teaches. But what else can you do? You hear more news over the following days. A peddler who's turned away from your village tells his story to the next village over, and that story makes its way back to you through a boy who was out checking his father's fish traps. The peddler says the sickness is moving fast, faster than anyone expected. It's already reached Gloucester. It's spreading along the roads, like fire through dry grass. Towns that were healthy a week ago are now graveyards. The peddler also said something else. He said that in some places, people have decided that the Jews are responsible, that they've been poisoning the wells, that they made a pact with the devil to destroy Christendom. In a town called Strasbourg, somewhere far away on the continent, they rounded up the entire Jewish community and burned them alive. Hundreds of people, men, women, children. You don't have any Jews in your village. You've never actually met a Jewish person in your life. But this news disturbs you in a way you can't quite articulate. If people are willing to do that, to burn their neighbours alive based on nothing but fear and rumours, then what else might they do? What happens when the sickness comes here and people start looking for someone to blame? At night, you lie awake next to Agnes and stare at the darkness above you. The thatched roof, the wooden beams, the same ceiling you've looked at your whole life. Agnes is sleeping, or pretending to sleep. Her breathing is too careful, too measured. She's awake too. She's just as scared as you are. Mary sleeps between you now. You moved her pallet closer after Robert's return. You want her near. You want to be able to reach out in the night and feel her small body, warm and alive, rising and falling with each breath. She's 4 years old. She's already survived more than most children do. The sweating sickness took her brother when she was 2. A fever took her sister last winter. A baby who never even got a name. Mary is your only living child, your only hope for the future. What would you do if the sickness comes? What would you do if Mary gets sick? You don't want to think about it, but you can't stop thinking about it. The days blur together, work in the fields, prayers in the church, watching the roads, waiting. The wheat is almost ready for harvest now, golden and heavy and beautiful. A good crop. A great crop, actually. If you can bring it in, you'll have more than enough to feed your family through the winter and still have surplus to sell. This could be your best year ever. But it's hard to care about the harvest when you're not sure if you'll be alive to eat it. More news comes. Always more news. A village 10 miles to the south has been hit. The sickness arrived with a merchant who came through before anyone knew to turn strangers away. Within 2 weeks, half the village was dead. The other half fled, scattering into the countryside, probably carrying the sickness with them. The lord of that manor, a minor knight named Sir Hugh something, tried to keep his peasants from leaving. He set armed men on the roads. It didn't matter. The peasants left anyway. What's a sword compared to what they were running from? You hear about the doctors too, the learned men in the cities, the ones who study medicine at the great universities. They've been trying to figure out what's causing the sickness and how to stop it. Their conclusion? Bad air. Corrupted air. Something has poisoned the atmosphere itself. Maybe it was the earthquakes that struck Italy a few years ago, releasing noxious vapours from deep in the earth. Maybe it was a conjunction of planets. Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, all aligned back in 1345, and the astrologers say this released poisonous influences into the sky. The cure, according to these learned men, is to avoid the bad air. Don't go out at night when the air is thick. Burn aromatic woods in your home to purify the atmosphere. Carry bundles of sweet-smelling herbs and flowers. Hold them to your nose when you walk through town. Also, don't bathe. This is important, apparently. Bathing opens the pores of your skin, and open pores let the corrupted air seep into your body. If you want to stay healthy, stay dirty. Let the grime build up. It's a protective barrier. You think about this for a moment. The most educated men in Christendom, the people who've spent their entire lives studying medicine, have concluded that the best way to avoid a deadly plague is to stop washing. Meanwhile, you've been bathing in the stream every few weeks like some kind of fool. Maybe you should thank God for your ignorance. You're not sure what to make of this advice, honestly. It sounds reasonable, in a way. Bad smells have always been associated with disease. Everyone knows that. The miasma that rises from swamps and garbage heaps, the stench of the tanner's quarter. These places are unhealthy. It makes sense that the sickness would be carried by bad air. But then again, Robert said that Bristol stinks of death, and the sickness is already there. So either the bad air caused the sickness, or the sickness caused the bad air. You're not educated enough to know which way it works. Father Edmund has his own explanation, which is simpler. God sent this plague. God will end it when he chooses. The only thing humans can do is repent and pray. Medical knowledge, such as it is, might help at the margins, but ultimately, this is a spiritual problem that requires a spiritual solution. You find yourself praying more than you ever have in your life. In the morning when you wake up, in the evening before you sleep, quick prayers throughout the day, just a word or two thrown up toward heaven. Please, God, please, spare my family, spare my village, spare me. You're not sure if God is listening. You're not sure if anyone is listening. Late August now. The heat has broken a little. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, that hint of autumn that comes every year around this time. Normally this is your favourite season. Harvest season, the culmination of a year's work. The fields full of activity, everyone working together to bring in the crops before the weather turns. This year, the harvest feels different. There's an urgency to it that has nothing to do with the weather. People work faster, harder, more desperately. Get the grain in, store it away. Prepare for whatever's coming, because something is coming. Everyone can feel it. The sickness is closer now, much closer. A village just 5 miles away reported its first cases 3 days ago. A family of 5, all dead within a week. The survivors have quarantined the cottage, nailed the door shut with the bodies still inside. No one wants to go in and retrieve them. No one wants to touch anything that might be contaminated. Your village has stayed clean so far. No fevers, no swellings, no deaths. But how long can that last? You're not isolated. You're on a road, a minor road, but still a road that connects to bigger roads that connect to Bristol and beyond. People pass through. Animals pass through. Whatever is carrying this sickness, surely it's only a matter of time before it finds its way here. You think about running, about packing up your family and fleeing to somewhere more remote. A cousin of yours lives in a village up in the hills, a tiny place with only a dozen families, far from any main road. Maybe the sickness won't reach there. Maybe you could survive. But you can't leave. Not really. You don't have permission. You don't have money. You don't have anywhere to go that would take you in. Your whole life is here. Your land, your home, your community. Everything you've ever known. So you stay. You work. You pray. You wait. And at night, in the darkness, you hold your wife and your daughter close and try not to think about what's coming. Try not to imagine the fever taking hold, the swellings appearing, the pain and the terror and the slow slide toward death. Try not to imagine digging graves for the people you love, but the imagination doesn't listen. It shows you everything anyway. Outside, the late summer night is alive with sounds. Crickets, An owl, the distant bark of a dog, normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the kind of sounds you've heard every night of your life. Agnes shifts beside you, and you feel her hand find yours in the darkness. Her fingers are rough from work, same as yours, calloused, strong. She doesn't say anything. Neither do you. There's nothing to say that hasn't already been said 100 times in your heads. You think about your father. He died when you were 14, taken by a fever that swept through the village one winter. You remember holding his hand at the end, feeling the heat radiating off his skin, watching him slip away into whatever comes next. It was terrible. The worst thing you'd ever experienced. But at least it was just him. At least the rest of your family survived. At least the village went on. This feels different. This feels like something that could take everyone. Every single person you've ever known. Every child, every elder, every young man and woman in their prime. All of them gone, leaving behind empty cottages and rotting crops and silence where there used to be life. You've never been particularly brave. You've never had to be. Bravery is for soldiers and knights, for people who face enemies they can see. What good is bravery against something invisible? Something that floats in the air or hides in the water, or travels in ways no one understands. Agnes squeezes your hand. You squeeze back. Whatever happens, you'll face it together. That's something at least. Maybe it's the only thing. The crickets keep singing. The owl calls out again, hunting in the darkness. And somewhere, in a village you've never visited, a family is dying right now. A mother is watching her children slip away. A husband is digging a grave for his wife. A priest is running out of prayers. Tomorrow you'll harvest wheat, you'll watch the roads, you'll pray, and you'll wait for the sickness to find you. It starts with old Marjorie. She's the one who makes cheese for half the village. 70 years old if she's a day, bent over from decades of work, but still sharp as a knife. She lives alone in a cottage at the edge of the village, ever since her husband died 8 winters ago. No children, no family left. Just her and her goats and her cheese. You've known Marjorie your whole life. When you were a boy, she used to give you scraps of fresh cheese when your mother sent you to buy some. She'd pinch your cheek and call you a good lad and tell you to grow up strong. She did that for every child in the village. Has been doing it for generations, probably. 3 days ago. Marjorie didn't come to the well for water. That's how you found out. Her neighbour, a woman named Edith, noticed that Marjorie's bucket was still hanging by her door at midday. Marjorie always got her water early, before the sun got too hot. Always, for as long as anyone could remember. So Edith went to check on her. She found Marjorie lying on the floor of her cottage, barely conscious, burning with fever. The village reacted the way you'd expect. Some people wanted to help. Some people wanted to run. Most people just stood around, not knowing what to do, looking at each other with wide eyes and hoping someone else would make the decision for them. In the end, it was Father Edmund who took charge. He organised a rotation of people to bring Marjorie water and broth, to keep her comfortable, to pray over her. He said it was their Christian duty. He said they couldn't abandon one of their own. He said that this might be an ordinary fever, nothing to do with the pestilence, and they shouldn't assume the worst. Nobody believed him, not even Father Edmund himself, probably. You weren't part of the rotation. Agnes wouldn't let you. She said you had Mary to think about, and she was right. If there was even a chance that Marjorie had the sickness, you couldn't risk bringing it home to your daughter. So you stayed away. You worked in the fields. You pretended not to notice the small group of people going in and out of Marjorie's cottage. The first day, Marjorie seemed to stabilise. The fever was bad, but she was still talking, still complaining, actually, which everyone took as a good sign. She told Father Edmund that his prayers were too long and his Latin was terrible. She told Edith to stop fussing and let her rest. She asked for her goats, wanted to make sure someone was feeding them. The second day, The swellings appeared. You heard about it from your neighbour, a man named Gilbert who had helped carry water that morning. He came to you in the fields, his face grey, and told you what he'd seen. A lump under Marjorie's left arm, already the size of a hen's egg, red and hard and hot to the touch. She couldn't lower her arm anymore because of the pain, couldn't lie on her left side, could barely speak through the fever. And a smell. Gilbert said there was already a smell, something wrong and rotten, even though she was still alive. By the third day, the lump had turned black, and there were more of them now. One on her neck, one in her groin. Her skin was blotchy, covered in dark spots that hadn't been there before. She wasn't speaking anymore, just moaning, sometimes. A low, constant sound that the people caring for her said they could hear from outside the cottage. Marjorie died on the fourth day, just as the sun was setting. Father Edmund was with her at the end. He gave her the last rites, anointed her with oil, prayed over her as she took her final breaths. He told the village that she died peacefully, that her soul was with God now. But you saw his face when he came out of that cottage. You saw his hands shaking. You saw the way he looked at the rest of you, like he was seeing the dead already. Nobody wanted to touch the body. Nobody wanted to go near the cottage. The cheese she had been making was still sitting in her workshop, half finished. And nobody wanted that either. Everything Marjorie owned, everything she touched, felt contaminated, cursed. In the end, 3 men drew lots to handle the burial. They wrapped Marjorie's body in her own bedding, carried her out to the churchyard, and dug a grave as fast as they could. No coffin, no time for that. Just a hole in the ground, and a quick prayer, and a desperate scramble to get away from the thing that had killed her. The 3 men who buried Marjorie were told to stay away from everyone else for a week. They set up camp in a barn at the edge of the village, sleeping on hay, eating food that was left for them at a distance. Their families brought them supplies but wouldn't come close. Children weren't allowed to visit their fathers. Wives called out to their husbands from 50 feet away. You watched this from a distance. You watched families torn apart by fear, people treating their own kin like enemies. It felt wrong. It felt like something fundamental was breaking in your community, some bond of trust and mutual care that had held you all together for generations. But you understood it too. You understood why they were afraid. You were afraid yourself. The day after Marjorie's burial, one of the men who had cared for her during her illness started feeling unwell. A woman named Joan, middle-aged, strong as an ox. She'd been the one who changed Marjorie's bedding and wiped her forehead with cool water. Joan developed a fever that night. The swellings appeared 2 days later. Joan was stronger than Marjorie, younger, more stubborn. She fought the sickness with everything she had. Her husband, a farmer named Peter, refused to leave her side even when everyone told him he was condemning himself. He held her hand through the worst of it, wiped the sweat from her face, tried to get her to drink water even when she couldn't keep anything down. The buboes on Joan grew larger than Marjorie's had been. By the 3rd day, the one under her arm was the size of a small apple, stretching the skin tight, the flesh around it turning colours you didn't know skin could turn. Purple and black, and a sickly greenish yellow around the edges. It looked like her body was rotting from the inside out, like the corruption was trying to push its way through her skin. The smell was worse too. A sweet, thick, terrible smell that seeped through the walls of her cottage and hung in the air for yards around. People walked the long way around to avoid passing her door. Even the animals seemed to stay away. Joan died on the 5th day, faster than Marjorie. Maybe because she was carrying more of whatever was causing this. Maybe because the sickness was getting stronger. Maybe it was just bad luck. Nobody knew. Nobody could know. Peter sat with her body for hours after she was gone. Nobody could get him to leave. Finally, Father Edmund went in and talked to him, and Peter came out with that look on his face. That empty, hollow look that you were starting to see everywhere now. The look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. 2 more people fell sick in the days that followed, then 3 more. Then you stopped counting, because counting felt like giving up, like admitting that this was happening, that it was real, that the plague had found your village and there was no stopping it. Father Edmund held services every day now. Morning mass, evening vespers, special prayers for the sick and the dying. The church was packed, which probably wasn't good. All those people breathing the same air. But what else could they do? Where else could they turn? You went to church with Agnes and Mary. You knelt on the cold stone floor and prayed harder than you'd ever prayed in your life. You begged God to spare your family. You promised anything, everything. You would give away all your possessions. You would go on pilgrimage. You would build a chapel with your own hands. Anything. Just please, God, please. Mary didn't understand what was happening. She was too young. She knew that people were sad and scared. She knew that Marjorie wasn't making cheese anymore. But she didn't grasp the bigger picture. At night, she asked why everyone was so quiet. Why nobody was laughing anymore. Why you and Agnes held her so tightly when you said goodnight. You didn't know how to explain it to her. How do you tell a 4-year-old that the world might be ending? The village tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. The harvest still needed to come in. The animals still needed to be fed. The basic machinery of survival still had to keep running, even as people died around you. But it got harder every day. Fewer hands to work the fields, fewer people to share the load. The wheat that was supposed to save you all was rotting in some places because there was nobody left to cut it. You worked longer hours, pushed yourself harder, came home so exhausted that you could barely eat before collapsing onto your bed. Agnes worked too. She took on extra tasks, helping families that had lost their workers, bringing food to the sick even though you begged her not to. She said she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. She said that if she got sick, at least she would know she'd tried to help. You wanted to argue with her. You wanted to lock her in your cottage and keep her safe. But you knew she was right. You knew that the whole village was in this together. That if everyone only looked out for themselves, there would be nothing left worth saving. So you let her go. You watched her walk out the door every morning, your heart in your throat, and you prayed that she would come back healthy. The church bells kept ringing. They rang for every death now, which meant they rang almost constantly. The sound followed you everywhere. A mournful tolling that cut through whatever you were doing and reminded you that someone else was gone. Old Walter, Gilbert's mother, the blacksmith's apprentice, the miller's youngest son. Names and faces that had been part of your life for as long as you could remember, disappearing one by one, leaving holes that could never be filled. The churchyard filled up fast. Father Edmund consecrated a new patch of ground at the back, then another patch when that one filled too. The graves were getting shallower because there weren't enough people to dig them properly. Some were barely more than pits, bodies covered with a thin layer of soil that the rain would wash away. You tried not to look when you passed the churchyard. You tried not to think about who was under that soil, who would be next. But at night, in your dreams, you saw them all, standing in a row, silent and accusing, asking why you were still alive when they were dead. You woke up gasping, heart pounding, and Agnes was there, holding you, telling you it was just a dream. Except it wasn't just a dream, it was reality, and it was only getting worse. 2 weeks after Marjorie died, almost a quarter of your village was gone. 27 people out of maybe 115. Men, women, children, young and old, strong and weak. The sickness didn't discriminate. It took whoever it wanted, whenever it wanted, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The survivors moved through their days like ghosts. Nobody smiled anymore. Nobody laughed. Even the children were quiet, sensing the fear that hung over everything like a fog. You developed a routine. Wake up, check yourself for fever, check Agnes, check Mary. If everyone seemed healthy, thank God and get to work. Work until your muscles screamed. Come home, eat whatever food there was, hold your family, sleep. Repeat. It was a grim existence, but it was existence, and as long as you kept existing, there was hope. You told yourself that every day. You told yourself that the sickness would pass eventually, that it had to burn itself out at some point, that if you could just hold on long enough, you and Agnes and Mary would make it through to the other side. You didn't believe it. Not really. But you said it anyway, because saying it was the only thing keeping you sane. Father Edmund was getting tired. You could see it in his face, in the way he moved, in the way his voice cracked during the prayers. He was burying people every day, sometimes multiple times a day. He was visiting the sick, comforting the dying, consoling the bereaved. He was doing the work of 10 men, and it was breaking him. One evening, after a particularly brutal day that had seen 3 burials before noon, you found Father Edmund sitting alone in the church, staring at the altar. You had come to pray, but you stopped when you saw him. He looked up at you with eyes that were older than his years, eyes that had seen too much. You didn't know what to say. What could you say? So you just sat down beside him, on the cold stone bench, and you sat there together in silence. 2 men who had run out of words. 2 men who were watching their world fall apart and couldn't do anything to stop it. After a long time, Father Edmund spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. He said he didn't understand. He said he had devoted his life to God, had tried to be a good priest, had served his flock faithfully for years, and now this. Now a plague that killed without reason or mercy. Now innocent people, good people, dying in agony while he prayed prayers that didn't seem to do anything. He asked you why. Why was God letting this happen? You didn't have an answer. Nobody did. So you just sat there with him, in the empty church, as the evening light faded and the shadows grew long. 2 men clinging to a faith that was getting harder to hold on to with every passing day. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll. Another death. Another soul gone. You closed your eyes and tried to remember what the world had been like before all this. Before the plague. Before the fear. Back when the biggest worry in your life was whether the harvest would be good, and whether Mary would grow up healthy. It felt like 1,000 years ago. It felt like a dream you were forgetting. But somewhere, buried beneath all the grief and terror, a small voice reminded you. You were still alive. Agnes was still alive. Mary was still alive. For now, that had to be enough. A week after your conversation with Father Edmund, a man arrived in the village claiming he could cure the plague. His name was Simon, and he said he was a physician. He came from London, or so he claimed, where he had studied at one of the great medical schools. He was a thin man, nervous, with darting eyes and stained fingers. He carried a leather bag full of instruments and potions. He smelled strongly of vinegar, which he said was for protection. The village had turned away travellers for weeks now. But Simon wasn't just any traveller. He was offering something nobody else could offer. Hope. Or at least, the possibility of hope. So the men guarding the road let him through, and he set up in the empty cottage of a family that had died the week before. Simon's treatments were expensive. A consultation cost more than most families earned in a month. But when your wife is dying, when your children are covered in black swellings and screaming in pain, money stops meaning much. People paid. They paid with coins, with livestock, with family heirlooms. They paid with anything they had. You watched from a distance at first. You didn't trust this stranger with his vinegar smell and his nervous eyes. But you also didn't have any better ideas. Nobody did. Simon's first patient was a young woman named Alice. She was 18, newly married, and she had developed the fever 3 days before Simon arrived. Her husband had paid for the treatment with their entire flock of sheep, every single animal they owned. Simon examined Alice in her cottage while a small crowd gathered outside. You were in that crowd. So was Agnes, even though you'd asked her to stay home. She said she wanted to see. She said she needed to know if there was any hope. After about an hour, Simon emerged. He looked satisfied, almost smug. He announced that he had identified the problem. Alice's humours were out of balance, as was to be expected with this type of pestilence. Her blood was too hot and too thick. The corruption had taken root in her vital fluids. The cure was obvious. She needed to be bled. Bleeding. You'd heard of it before. The physicians in cities swore by it. The theory was that removing some of the corrupted blood would allow the body to produce new, clean blood to replace it. Made sense, in a way. If something bad was in your blood, getting rid of some of the blood should get rid of some of the bad thing. Simon bled Alice that afternoon. He made a cut in her arm, a small, neat incision, and let the blood flow into a basin. Dark blood, almost black. He said that was proof of the corruption. He said the procedure was working. By evening, Alice was weaker. By the next morning, she was delirious. By noon, she was dead. Her husband stood in the doorway of their cottage, staring at nothing. He'd given everything he had for this treatment, every sheep, every hope. And now his wife was dead, and he had nothing left. Simon had explanations, of course. He said Alice had been too far gone when he arrived. He said the corruption had spread too deep. He said that if he'd gotten to her sooner, the bleeding would have worked. It wasn't his fault. It was the disease. Some people believed him. Some people didn't. But enough people believed him that he stayed, and more patients came. His second treatment was worse. A man named Richard had developed a bubo under his left arm, a swelling the size of a goose egg that was causing him terrible pain. Simon examined it and announced that the lump was full of poisonous matter. The cure was to lance it, to cut it open and drain the corruption. You weren't there when he did it. You heard about it afterwards. When Simon cut into the bubo, a thick, foul-smelling fluid burst out. Pus and blood and something darker, something that smelled like rot. The fluid sprayed across Simon's hands, across his clothes, across the bedding and the walls of the cottage. Richard screamed so loud that people heard it from the other end of the village. Simon said the procedure was a success. He said he had removed the corruption. He said Richard would recover now. Richard died 3 days later. But before he died, his wife fell sick, and his daughter, and the neighbour who had helped hold him down during the lancing. 4 more deaths, spreading outward from that single cut. You began to wonder if Simon was helping anyone at all, or if he was just making things worse. You weren't the only one wondering, but nobody did anything about it. What could they do? Tell him to leave? And then what? Go back to having no hope at all? Simon stayed for another week, before he disappeared, left in the middle of the night, taking his leather bag and whatever coins he'd managed to collect. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody really cared. By then, 3/4 of his patients were dead, and the rest were dying. Some people said he was a fraud. Some people said he did his best with the knowledge he had. Some people said it didn't matter either way, because nothing was going to stop this plague. You believed that last one. More and more, you believed it. Meanwhile, Agnes kept going out. Every day, she visited the sick, brought them food and water, sat with them when their families couldn't bear to be in the same room anymore. She held hands and wiped foreheads, and whispered prayers into ears that might not even hear her anymore. You begged her to stop. You got down on your knees and begged. You told her that every time she walked into one of those cottages, she was risking her life, risking Mary's future, risking everything. She looked at you with those grey eyes of hers, calm and steady, and she said she knew. She knew the risk, but someone had to do it. Someone had to be there for the dying. If everyone hid in their homes and waited for the sickness to pass, what kind of community would they be? What kind of Christians? You didn't have an answer to that. You never did. So you watched her go, every single day, and you waited for her to come home. You checked her forehead for fever and examined her neck for swellings, and thanked God when she seemed healthy. Another day, another night, another small miracle. The wolves started coming closer around this time. At first, it was just distant howling. You'd hear them at night, out in the woods beyond the fields, calling to each other across the darkness. Nothing unusual about that. Wolves had always been out there. They'd always been a danger, a background threat that every villager knew about and guarded against. But now, they were getting bolder. People started seeing them in daylight. A woman gathering firewood spotted a wolf watching her from the tree line. A boy herding his family's remaining sheep saw 3 wolves following the flock at a distance, patient and unhurried. The wolves knew. Somehow, they knew that the village was weakening, that there were fewer people to stand guard, fewer dogs to bark warnings, fewer armed men to drive them off. The careful balance that humans had maintained with the wilderness for generations was tilting. The wild was encroaching. One morning, you found the remains of a pig just outside the village boundary. Something had dragged it out of its pen during the night and eaten most of it. The tracks in the mud were wolf tracks, big ones. Nobody had the energy to organise a hunting party. Nobody had the time. The living were too busy burying the dead and caring for the dying, so the wolves kept coming closer, kept testing the edges, kept waiting. Then, the flagellants arrived. You'd heard rumours about them for days, strange men who travelled from town to town, whipping themselves bloody in the name of God. People said they believed that enough suffering, enough penance, could turn away God's wrath, that if they punished themselves severely enough, the plague would stop. It sounded insane. It sounded like something only desperate, broken people would do. And then, they came walking down the road toward your village, and you saw that they were exactly that. Desperate, broken. Human beings pushed past the edge of what humans could bear. There were maybe 30 of them. They wore white robes stained brown with old blood and dirt. They walked in a slow procession, 2 by 2, singing hymns in Latin that most of them probably didn't understand. Their leader, a tall man with wild eyes and a scraggly beard, carried a wooden cross before him like a standard. The village gathered to watch them, not welcoming exactly, but not hostile either, just watching, waiting to see what would happen. The flagellants stopped in the village green, the same spot where Robert had returned from Bristol with his terrible news, what felt like a lifetime ago. Their leader planted his cross in the ground and raised his arms to the sky. He began to preach. His voice was raw, hoarse from days or weeks of shouting, but the words came out with a fierce intensity that made everyone listen. He talked about sin, about punishment, about how the plague was God's judgment on a wicked world, about how the only hope was repentance, true repentance, not just prayers and fasting, but real suffering, real pain, the kind of pain that showed God you were serious. Then, the flagellants stripped to the waist and began to whip themselves. You'd never seen anything like it. Each of them had a scourge, a leather whip with multiple tails, and at the end of each tail was a small metal spike, or a knot with something sharp embedded in it. They swung these whips over their shoulders, striking their own backs again and again. The first few blows left red welts, then the welts broke open, then the blood started flowing. It was horrifying. It was mesmerizing. You couldn't look away, even though part of you desperately wanted to. Around you, other villagers were the same. Some were crying, some were praying, Some just stood there with their mouths open, unable to process what they were seeing. The flagellants kept going. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Their backs became masses of torn flesh and running blood. Some of them were weeping as they whipped themselves. Some of them were smiling, as if they were experiencing something beautiful instead of something terrible. The leader preached throughout, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the whips. He said this was how to save your soul. This was how to appease God's wrath. This was how to end the plague. When they finally stopped, the ground around them was spattered with blood. The flagellants pulled their robes back on over their ruined backs, the white fabric immediately soaking through with red. They looked exhausted, barely able to stand. The leader asked if anyone from the village wanted to join them, if anyone wanted to take up the scourge and help carry the burden of humanity's sins. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The flagellants stayed that night, camping at the edge of the village. In the morning, they moved on, continuing their march to nowhere in particular, continuing their endless penance. You watched them go and felt nothing but emptiness. They believed they were doing something meaningful. They believed their suffering mattered. But the plague didn't care about their bleeding backs any more than it cared about Simon's treatments or Father Edmund's prayers. It just kept killing. It just kept spreading. It just kept being what it was. That night, you held Agnes close and listened to her breathe. Mary was asleep between you, her small body warm against your side. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, you heard wolves howling. Everything was falling apart. The village, the world, the careful structures that had kept human life going for generations. All of it crumbling under the weight of something nobody could see or understand. And yet, here you were, still alive, still holding on to the people you loved, still getting up every morning and doing what needed to be done. Maybe that was all you could do. Maybe that was all anyone could do. The harvest had mostly come in by now, though not all of it. Some fields were still standing, their grain rotting because there was nobody left to cut it. The families who owned those fields were dead or too sick to work. The rest of the village was too exhausted to help. Sheep wandered through the landscape with nobody to tend them. Cows lowed in pastures, their udders painfully full because nobody came to milk them anymore. The carefully managed order of rural life was unravelling, one thread at a time. You did what you could. You milked the abandoned cows and distributed the milk to whoever needed it. You herded the wandering sheep back toward their pens, though half of them just escaped again. You tried to help, even when helping felt pointless. Father Edmund kept holding services, though the congregation grew smaller every day. He baptized babies, though fewer babies were being born now. He buried the dead, though his prayers had grown shorter and his voice had grown weaker. One evening, after another burial, Father Edmund announced that he would stop ringing the church bells for deaths. The constant tolling was spreading panic, he said. It was reminding everyone, every hour of every day, that more people were dying. Better to let some things pass in silence. Nobody argued with him. The bells had become a kind of torture, that endless reminder of loss. When they finally stopped, the silence was strange at first. Then, it was a relief. At least now you could pretend, for a few minutes at a time, that the world was normal, that nothing had changed, that the plague was just a bad dream you would wake up from eventually. But then, someone would cough, or someone would mention a name that no longer answered, or you would pass by a cottage with the door nailed shut, its occupants dead inside because nobody had the courage or the strength to retrieve them, and the dream would shatter. And you would remember that this was real. All of it. And there was no waking up. September now. The days growing shorter, the nights growing cooler, the plague still burning through what remained of your village, like a slow fire that would not go out. You kept checking yourself for fever every morning. You kept checking Agnes. You kept checking Mary. So far, so good. But for how long? It happens on a Tuesday. You wake up before dawn, same as always. The grey light is seeping through the gaps in the shutters. Mary is still sleeping, her small body curled up in a ball. You reach over to touch Agnes's shoulder, to wake her for the day ahead. Her skin is hot. Not warm, hot. The kind of hot that means something is wrong. You sit up. Your heart is already pounding. You tell yourself it might be nothing. A flush from sleeping under too many blankets. A mild illness. The kind everyone gets sometimes. It doesn't have to be the plague. It doesn't have to be. Agnes opens her eyes. They're glassy, unfocused. She looks at you like she's not quite sure who you are. She says she doesn't feel well. Her voice is weak, scratchy. She says her head hurts, her joints ache. She's so tired, more tired than she's ever been. You tell her to stay in bed. You tell her to rest. You tell her everything is going to be fine. You don't believe it, but you say it anyway. Mary wakes up and asks what's wrong with Mama. You tell her Mama is just tired and needs to sleep. You take Mary outside and find a neighbour to watch her for the day. The neighbour, a woman named Bess, whose husband died 2 weeks ago, looks at you with knowing eyes. She doesn't ask questions. She just nods and takes Mary's hand and leads her away. You go back inside. Agnes is shivering now, even though her skin is burning up. You pile every blanket you have on top of her. You bring her water, cool water from the well, and help her drink. Most of it dribbles down her chin because she's too weak to swallow properly. The day passes in a blur. You sit beside her. You hold her hand. You talk to her, though you're not sure she can hear you. You tell her about the wheat you harvested, about Mary's latest questions about the world, about the time you first saw her, 15 years ago, at the midsummer festival in the village where she grew up. She was dancing around the bonfire with the other girls, and you couldn't take your eyes off her. She doesn't respond. She's drifting in and out of consciousness, lost somewhere between sleep and waking. By evening, you know. You know with a certainty that sits in your stomach like a stone. The swelling appears the next morning, under her left arm, a lump the size of a walnut, hard and hot and painful to the touch. Agnes cries out when you accidentally brush against it. She cries out, and then she starts crying for real, because she knows too. She knows what this means. You hold her while she cries. You stroke her hair and whisper that you love her, and that you're not going anywhere. You're not like those people in the stories, the ones who abandon their families at the first sign of sickness. You're not going to leave her to die alone. She grips your hand so tight it hurts. She looks at you with those grey eyes, clearer now than they've been since the fever started. She says she's sorry. She says she should have listened to you. She should have stopped visiting the sick. She should have stayed home, stayed safe, stayed with you and Mary. You tell her to stop. You tell her she was being kind, being good, being the person she's always been. You tell her you wouldn't have wanted her any other way. She manages a small smile at that, a ghost of the smile you fell in love with. Then the fever takes her again, and she's gone, drifting away to wherever sick people go when the world becomes too painful to stay in. The next few days are the worst of your life. You watch the swelling grow. It doubles in size, then triples. The skin around it turns colours you've never seen on a living person. Red, then purple, then a sickly black that looks like death itself is pushing its way to the surface. Agnes can't move her arm anymore, can't lie on her left side, can barely breathe without pain. You try everything. You burn juniper in the cottage to purify the air. You press cool cloths to her forehead to bring down the fever. You pray, endlessly, desperately, the same words over and over until they lose all meaning. News spreads through what's left of the village. Agnes, the woman who spent weeks helping others, is now the one who needs help. But nobody comes. Not at first. People are afraid. You understand that. You don't blame them. But it still hurts, knowing that your wife gave everything to this community, and now the community can't bring itself to cross your threshold. Eventually, Bess comes. She's already lost her husband and 2 of her children. She's got nothing left to lose, she says. She brings broth and bread and sits with Agnes while you take a break, while you walk outside and gulp fresh air and try to remember what it feels like to not be drowning in fear. Bess doesn't say much. She doesn't offer false hope or empty comfort. She just sits there, holding Agnes's hand, being present. It's the kindest thing anyone has done for you in weeks. Father Edmund comes to visit. He stands in the doorway, unwilling to come closer. He says prayers from a distance. He offers what comfort he can, which isn't much. He looks at Agnes with the same expression he's had for everyone who's gotten sick. That mixture of pity and resignation. That acceptance of death. You want to scream at him. You want to grab him by his robes and demand that he do something, anything, that he use whatever power God gave him to save your wife. But you don't. Because you know there's nothing he can do. There's nothing anyone can do. You hear whispers from the village, people talking about you. Some say you should leave Agnes, the way others have left their sick relatives. They say it's the only way to protect yourself, to protect Mary. They say staying is suicide. Others say you're doing the right thing, that a man should stand by his wife, that this is what the marriage vow means, in sickness and in health, till death do you part. You don't care what any of them think. You made a promise to Agnes 15 years ago. You're going to keep it. Mary keeps asking to see her mother. Bess has been keeping her, feeding her, keeping her occupied. But Mary knows something is wrong. She knows her mother is sick. She wants to come home. You can't let her. You can't let Mary see Agnes like this. Can't let her watch her mother die. Can't risk Mary getting sick too. So you tell Mary that Mama needs to rest, that she'll get better soon, that Mary needs to be a good girl and stay with Bess for a little while longer. Mary cries. She doesn't understand. She's 4 years old. How could she understand? You cry too, once Mary is gone. You cry like you haven't cried since you were a child. Great heaving sobs that shake your whole body. You cry because you're losing your wife, because your daughter is scared and confused and you can't comfort her, because the world has become a nightmare and there's no waking up. Agnes's bubo bursts on the 4th day. You're changing the cloth on her forehead when it happens. A sound like something tearing, and then a smell that hits you like a physical blow. You look down and see the wound, gaping and wet, oozing something that doesn't look like it should come out of a human body. Agnes screams, a raw, animal sound that you've never heard from her before. She screams, and you hold her down, because she's thrashing now, trying to get away from the pain, and you don't know what else to do. When she finally goes still, when the screaming fades to whimpering and then to silence, you clean the wound as best you can. The fluid that comes out is thick and dark and smells like decay. You wipe it away with rags that you'll burn later. You bandage the wound with strips torn from your own shirt. Agnes looks up at you with eyes that are barely there anymore. She's fading. You can see it happening in real time. Whatever spark makes a person alive is dimming inside her, guttering like a candle in the wind. She whispers something. You lean closer to hear. She says to take care of Mary. She says to find someone else when this is over. Someone to be a mother to their daughter. She says she doesn't want you to be alone. You tell her to stop talking like that. You tell her she's going to get better. You tell her you won't need to find anyone else because she's going to be right here, with you, where she belongs. She smiles. That sad, knowing smile of someone who's accepted what you can't accept. You lie down beside her. You pull her close, careful not to touch the wound. You breathe in the smell of her hair, underneath the smell of sickness, finding traces of the woman she used to be. You hold her and you don't let go. Sometime during the night, Agnes dies. You know the exact moment it happens. Her breathing, which has been shallow and ragged for hours, suddenly stops. Her body, which has been tense with pain, relaxes completely. The heat of her fever begins to fade, replaced by a coldness that spreads from her extremities inward. You don't move. You keep holding her. You keep breathing, in and out, even though part of you wants to stop. Part of you wants to follow her wherever she's gone. But you can't. You have Mary. You have a daughter who needs you, who's waiting for you, who doesn't know yet that her mother is never coming home. So you hold Agnes until the first light of dawn creeps through the shutters. You hold her until your arms are numb and your tears have dried on your cheeks. You hold her until you find the strength to let go. Then you stand up. You look at your wife's body, so still now, so peaceful after days of agony. You make the sign of the cross and whisper a prayer for her soul, and you walk outside to tell the world that Agnes is dead. The morning is cold, frost on the ground. Autumn has arrived while you were watching your wife die. The seasons keep changing. The world keeps turning, even when everything that matters to you has stopped. Father Edmund comes to help with the burial. So does Gilbert, your neighbour, one of the few men still healthy enough to dig. Bess comes too, though she stands back at a distance, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. You wrap Agnes in her own blanket, the one she wove herself, the one that's covered you both on countless cold nights. She looks smaller now than she did in life, shrunken somehow. Death does that to people, takes away whatever it is that makes them fill up space. You carry her to the churchyard, to the newest section, where the fresh graves are packed so close together there's barely room to walk between them. The older sections, the ones where your parents are buried, where generations of your family have been laid to rest, are pristine and orderly. These new graves look like wounds in the earth, raw and fresh and wrong. The hole Gilbert digs is shallow. There isn't time or energy for anything deeper. The ground is hard with the coming winter, and Gilbert is exhausted, and there are other bodies waiting to be buried. You lower Agnes into it and say the words that need to be said. You throw handfuls of dirt on top of her and watch as she disappears beneath the earth. Father Edmund's prayer is brief, shorter than it should be, but you don't blame him. He's said these words so many times now that they've worn thin. There's only so much grief one man can carry. When it's over, you stand at the grave for a long time. Gilbert leaves, Father Edmund leaves, even Bess eventually walks away. But you stay. You stay until the sun is high in the sky, and your legs ache from standing, and your eyes are dry because you have no more tears. Then you go to get your daughter. Mary runs to you when she sees you. She throws her arms around your legs and holds on tight. She asks where Mama is. She asks when Mama is coming home. You kneel down so you're at her level. You look into her eyes, the same grey as her mother's, and you tell her the truth. You tell her that Mama got very sick, that Mama tried to get better, but she couldn't, that Mama went to heaven to be with God and the angels. Mary doesn't understand. Of course she doesn't. She's 4. She asked when Mama is coming back from heaven. She asks if she can visit. You hold her while she cries. You hold her while she asks questions you can't answer. You hold her while the reality slowly sinks in, as much as reality can sink in for someone so young. Later, you take her home. The cottage smells wrong now, like sickness and death, like the end of everything you've known. You open the shutters to let in fresh air. You burn the bedding Agnes died on. You scrub the floor and the walls with vinegar, even though you know it probably won't help. That night, you and Mary sleep together in your bed. She curls up against you the way she used to curl up against Agnes. Her small body is warm and alive and breathing, and you hold on to her like she's the only thing keeping you tethered to the world. Because she is. She's all you have left. Outside, the September night is quiet. No church bells ringing, no sounds of life from the other cottages. Just the wind in the trees and the distant howl of wolves. Your village has lost more than half its people now. The survivors are scattered, isolated, going through the motions of living without really being alive. The community that raised you, that taught you everything you know, that was supposed to be there for your children and your children's children, is dying, maybe already dead. And Agnes is gone, your wife, your partner, the person who made this hard life bearable. She's lying in a shallow grave in the churchyard, and you're lying in an empty bed with your daughter, and the future stretches out ahead of you like a dark road with no end in sight. You don't know how you're going to survive this. You don't know how you're going to raise Mary alone. You don't know how you're going to get through tomorrow, let alone the rest of your life. But you have to try. For Mary, for Agnes, for whatever comes next. You close your eyes. You listen to your daughter breathe. And eventually, somehow, you sleep. The days after Agnes die blur together. You get up. You feed Mary. You do whatever work needs doing. You go to sleep. You get up again. The rhythm of survival, stripped down to its bones. Mary asks about her mother every day at first. Where is she? When is she coming back? Why can't they go visit her in heaven? You answer as best you can, but there are no good answers to questions like these. Eventually, Mary stops asking. You're not sure if that's better or worse. You learn to cook, or rather, you learn to cook enough to keep a small child alive. Pottage, mostly. You throw whatever vegetables you can find into a pot with some water and let it simmer until it's soft enough to eat. Mary doesn't complain. She eats what you give her and looks at you with her mother's quiet gaze, and you try to smile for her, even when smiling feels impossible. The village continues to shrink. Every few days, another cottage goes silent, another family disappears. Sometimes you find out what happened, sometimes you don't. There aren't enough healthy people left to keep track of the dead. Gilbert gets sick in early October. He's the one who helped bury Agnes, the neighbour who dug the shallow grave. You find out when his wife comes to your door, wild-eyed and shaking, asking if you have any herbs or medicine or anything at all that might help. You don't. Nobody does. You tell her you're sorry. You watch her walk back to her cottage, her shoulders hunched against a grief that hasn't even fully arrived yet. Gilbert dies 4 days later. His wife survives, somehow. Their 3 children survive. But Gilbert, who was strong and healthy and in the prime of his life, is gone. Another name added to the list. Another grave in the overcrowded churchyard. Father Edmund keeps going for longer than anyone expected. He buries Gilbert. He buries 6 more people that week. He holds services for a congregation that barely fills the first 2 rows of benches anymore. He visits the sick, blesses the dying, comforts the bereaved. He does the work of a priest even when it seems like God has abandoned everyone. And then, Father Edmund gets sick. You hear about it from Bess, who heard it from someone else. Father Edmund developed a fever 3 nights ago. He tried to hide it at first, tried to keep doing his duties, but the sickness was too strong. He collapsed during evening vespers. 2 men carried him to his cottage and laid him in his bed. Nobody knows what to do. Father Edmund is the only priest in the village, the only connection to God, or at least to the church that speaks for God. Without him, who will say the prayers? Who will give the last rites? Who will make sure the dead get into heaven? You go to see him, not because you think you can help, but because it feels like the right thing to do. This man baptized your daughter. He married you and Agnes. He stood over your wife's grave and said the words that were supposed to ease her passage to the next world. You owe him something, even if all you can offer is your presence. Father Edmund's cottage is small and plain. A bed, a table, a few books, a crucifix on the wall. He's lying under a thin blanket, his face flushed and sweating, his eyes unfocused. He looks smaller than he did behind the altar, frailer, more human. You sit with him for an hour. You don't say much, neither does he. Occasionally he murmurs something in Latin, fragments of prayers that have been worn smooth by decades of repetition. You hold his hand, the way you held Agnes's hand. You try to offer whatever comfort a dying man can receive from another person's touch. Before you leave, Father Edmund looks at you, really looks at you, with clarity that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the fever. He says he's scared. He says he knows he shouldn't be, that as a priest he's supposed to have faith in what comes after death. But he's scared anyway. He's human, after all. Just a man who tried to do some good in a world that didn't make it easy. You tell him that Agnes is waiting for him. You tell him that when he gets to heaven, she'll be there to show him around. She was always good at making people feel welcome. He smiles at that. A small, tired smile. Then his eyes close, and he drifts away again. Father Edmund dies 2 days later. There's no one to give him last rites. There's no one to say the proper prayers over his body. A few of the surviving villagers gather in the churchyard and do their best to remember the words. But it's not the same. It can't be the same. You help dig his grave. It feels like the least you can do. October passes. The leaves change colour and fall from the trees. The days grow shorter, the nights longer and colder. The plague keeps killing, but slower now. There are fewer people left to infect, fewer targets for whatever invisible force has been stalking the village since summer. The landscape has changed. You notice it more and more as the weeks go by. Fields that should have been harvested are standing empty, the grain rotted and ruined. Orchards full of fallen apples that no one picked. Gardens overgrown with weeds because the people who tended them are dead or too exhausted to care. Animals roam everywhere. Sheep that lost their shepherds wander in loose flocks across the countryside, their wool matted and dirty. Cows bellow miserably in pastures, their udders swollen from days without milking. Pigs root through abandoned cottages, eating whatever they can find. The wolves are worse than the animals. You see them now almost every day. Not just at the edges of the forest, not just at night. They walk through the village in broad daylight, bold and unafraid. They know that the humans are weakened. One morning, you wake to the sound of screaming. Not human screaming, animal screaming. You grab your scythe and run outside, and you find a wolf pack tearing apart one of the sheep near your cottage. 3 wolves, their muzzles red with blood, their eyes watching you as they eat. You shout at them. You wave your scythe. They look at you for a long moment, calculating. Then, slowly, they back away. They don't run, they just walk, dragging what's left of the sheep with them. That's the part that stays with you. They weren't afraid. They left because they chose to leave, not because you scared them off. You start keeping the fire burning all night. You start blocking the door with heavy furniture. These are not thoughts you ever expected to have. But here you are, trying to figure out how to survive things that shouldn't be survivable. November comes. The first frost arrives, painting the dead fields white. The plague seems to be slowing. You go entire days now without hearing about a new death. Entire days when it almost feels like the nightmare might be ending. But the damage has been done. You walk through the village and count the occupied cottages on one hand. Where there were once dozens of families, Now there are maybe 15 people left. 15 out of more than 100. The rest are dead, or fled, or simply gone, vanished to wherever people go when the world falls apart. You and Mary settle into a new routine. Wake up, eat whatever you can scrape together, do the endless work of survival, feed the animals, the ones that are left, collect firewood for the coming winter, try to preserve what food you can find. Winter is coming, and you're not ready for it. You're never going to be ready for it. Agnes was the one who handled the winter preparations. She knew how to salt meat, how to dry vegetables, how to store grain so it wouldn't rot or get eaten by mice. You watched her do these things for years, but watching isn't the same as doing. You make mistakes, a lot of mistakes. You salt some pork too heavily and it becomes inedible. You try to dry some apples and they turn mouldy instead. You store some grain in the wrong part of the cottage and mice get into it, eating through half your supply before you notice. Each mistake means less food for winter. Each mistake means a harder few months ahead. You curse yourself for not paying better attention, for assuming that Agnes would always be there to handle these things, for never learning what you should have learned. But you keep going. What else can you do? Mary has stopped asking about Agnes. She's stopped crying at night. You're not sure if she's accepted what happened, or if she's just learned to hide her grief the way you've learned to hide yours. She follows you around during the day, helping with small tasks, asking questions about everything. How do you start a fire? Why do the leaves change colour? Where do the birds go in winter? You answer her questions as best you can. You try to teach her the things Agnes would have taught her. How to sew, how to cook, how to take care of a home. You're not very good at any of these things, but you're all she has. She learns fast, your daughter. Faster than you would have expected for a 4-year-old. She watches everything you do with those serious grey eyes, and then she tries to copy it. Sometimes she fails. Sometimes she succeeds. Either way, she tries again. You wonder if this is what it means to raise a child. This constant teaching, this endless passing down of knowledge from one generation to the next. Agnes would have done it better. Agnes would have known what to say and when to say it. But Agnes is gone, and you're here, and you have to figure it out as you go. At night, you tell her stories. Not scary stories, not anymore. Gentle. Stories about knights and princesses and magical forests where nothing bad ever happens. She falls asleep curled against your side, her breathing slow and steady, and you stare at the ceiling and wonder if you're doing any of this right. The lord of the manor sends a man in mid-November, a tired-looking clerk on a tired-looking horse, carrying a message that the lord wants to know how many of his tenants are still alive, how much land is being worked, how much tribute he can expect come spring. You tell the clerk that the village has been gutted, that more than half the people are dead, that the fields are ruined, and there won't be any surplus to collect. The clerk writes this down in a little book, his face expressionless, and then he rides away. You never see anyone from the manor again that winter. Maybe they have bigger problems. Maybe they're dead too. You don't know, and you don't much care. The hardest part is the silence. You've lived in this village your whole life. You know the sounds of it the way you know your own heartbeat. The rhythm of daily life, the voices and footsteps and animal noises that made up the background music of existence. Now it's quiet. Too quiet. When you walk through the village, your own footsteps seem to echo off the empty cottages. When you call out a greeting, no one answers. The world has become a hollow shell, and you're rattling around inside it like a dried seed. Some nights, you sit outside after Mary has fallen asleep. You look up at the stars, the same stars that have watched over humanity since the beginning of time. You think about Agnes. You think about Father Edmund. You think about everyone you've lost. And you wonder why you're still here, why you survived when so many didn't. There's no reason for it, no logic, You weren't stronger than the people who died. You weren't better. You weren't more deserving. You just got lucky, if you can call this luck. Mary stirs in her sleep, murmuring something you can't quite hear. You go back inside and lie down beside her. Her small body is warm against the November chill. Her breathing is steady. She's alive. She's here. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the only meaning you're going to find in any of this. Your daughter survived. Your job now is to make sure she keeps surviving, to give her a future, even if that future looks nothing like the world you grew up in. You think about Agnes. What would she want you to do? She'd want you to be strong. She'd want you to take care of Mary. She'd want you to keep going, even when it feels impossible. So that's what you'll do, one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, until something changes, or nothing changes, or the world ends completely. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. Another one answers, closer than you'd like. You close your eyes, you breathe, and you wait for whatever comes next. Winter arrives in full force in December. Snow blankets the fields, covering the rotted grain and the abandoned orchards and the shallow graves in the churchyard. Everything looks clean under the snow, white and peaceful and quiet. You can almost forget what's buried underneath. The cold is brutal, worse than any winter you can remember. You and Mary spend most of your time huddled by the fire, burning through your stockpile of wood faster than you'd like. The cottage walls let in drafts that make the candles flicker. Ice forms on the inside of the shutters overnight. Food is scarce. The mistakes you made during autumn, the poorly preserved meat and the mouse-eaten grain, come back to haunt you now. You ration everything. A little bread in the morning, a thin soup at midday, whatever you can scrape together for dinner. Mary never complains, but you can see that she's thinner than she should be. Her cheeks aren't as round as they were last summer. You trade with the other survivors when you can, a bit of your remaining grain for some of their preserved vegetables, a few hours of labour in exchange for a jug of milk. The economy of survival, stripped down to its essentials. But you survive. That's the main thing. You survive. Mary turns 5 in early December. You don't have much to give her, a wooden doll you carved yourself. Clumsy and lopsided, but recognisable. You worked on it for 3 nights, whittling by firelight, cursing every time the knife slipped. Agnes could have made something beautiful. You made something that looks like it was carved by a drunk man with one eye closed. But it's the best you can do. You also managed to find a piece of honeycomb, traded from Bess in exchange for some firewood. And you tell Mary a story about a princess who lived in a castle made of ice, which you make up as you go along, inventing details on the spot, watching her face to see what makes her smile. She seems happy with these small gifts. She holds the wooden doll close and gives it a name. Eleanor, she calls it. After the Queen in one of the stories you told her weeks ago. She feeds Eleanor invisible food and tucks her into bed at night and has long conversations with her when she thinks you're not listening. You watch your daughter play and feel something that might be hope, or maybe just the absence of despair. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes, but you'll take it. After the year you've had, you'll take whatever you can get. The plague stops in December too. Just stops. One day there are still people getting sick, and then there aren't. No new fevers, no new swellings, no new graves in the churchyard. The sickness has run out of victims, or decided to move on, or simply exhausted itself. Nobody knows why it stopped, any more than they knew why it started. You wait for it to come back. For weeks, you wait. Every cough makes your heart race. Every headache makes you check for swellings. Every time Mary seems tired or warm, you spend the night awake, watching her breathe, praying. But it doesn't come back. Days pass, then weeks. The snow keeps falling, the fire keeps burning, And slowly, painfully, you begin to believe that maybe the worst is really over. The survivors start to emerge from their isolation, not quickly, not confidently, but gradually, like animals coming out of their burrows after a long winter. You see your neighbours more often now. You exchange words, sometimes even smiles, though smiling still feels strange. There are so few of you left, 15 people, give or take. Where there were once more than 100, now there are 15. You could fit the entire village into a single cottage. Bess is still alive. She lost her husband and 2 children, but she's still here. Gilbert's widow is still alive, raising 3 children on her own now. Old Walter survived, somehow, despite being the oldest person in the village. A few other families, scattered among the empty cottages like the last leaves clinging to a bare tree. You start helping each other, not out of charity exactly, out of necessity. There's too much work for any one person to do, and not enough people to do it. So you share. You trade labour for goods, goods for labour. You milk the cows that belong to dead families and divide the milk among the living. You slaughter pigs that have gone feral and share the meat. It's a strange kind of community, smaller and more fragile than the one you grew up in. But it's something. It's better than being completely alone. January brings the coldest nights of the year. The snow piles up so high that you have to dig your way out of the cottage some mornings. The fire burns constantly, eating through your wood supply, and you start to worry about running out before spring. You and a few other men organise a trip to the forest to cut more wood. It's dangerous. The wolves are still out there, still bold and hungry. But you don't have a choice. Without wood, you'll freeze. You leave before dawn, carrying axes and saws and whatever weapons you can find. Mary stays with Bess, who promises to keep her safe and warm. You kiss your daughter goodbye and try not to think about the possibility that you might not come back. The forest is beautiful in winter, quiet and still, the trees covered in white, the snow muffling all sound. You almost forget to be afraid. Almost. The wolves find you around midday, a pack of 5, watching from between the trees, their breath steaming in the cold air. They don't attack. They just watch, evaluating, deciding. You and the other men form a circle, backs together, weapons pointed outward. You shout and bang your tools together, making as much noise as you can. The wolves watch for a long time. Then, as if on some silent signal, they turn and disappear into the forest. You cut your wood as fast as you can and haul it back to the village before dark. Your hands are blistered and your back aches, and you're more tired than you've ever been. But you have enough wood to last the rest of the winter, and you're alive. That's what matters. February brings the first thaw. The snow starts to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. The days grow slightly longer. The worst of the cold begins to ease. And then, something happens that you didn't expect. A man comes to the village from the manor. Not the tired clerk from before. Someone more important. A steward, dressed in fine clothes that look out of place in your ruined village. He arrives on a horse that probably cost more than everything you own combined. He has guards with him, though they look nervous, like they're not sure what to expect. The steward says the Lord is concerned about his lands, about who will work them come spring, about who will pay the rents and produce the crops that feed his household. He speaks carefully, choosing his words like a man walking through a field of snakes. The steward looks around at the empty cottages, the overgrown fields, the handful of survivors standing in the snow. He looks worried, which is strange, because you've never seen anyone from the manor look worried before. Lords and their servants don't worry about peasants. Peasants worry about them. He makes an offer. Better terms for anyone willing to stay and work, higher wages, reduced rents, freedoms that would have been unthinkable a year ago. He talks about opportunities, about the need for skilled workers, about how the survivors can negotiate from a position of strength. The words sound foreign coming from his mouth. You've spent your whole life being told what to do, not being asked. You've spent your whole life accepting whatever terms were offered because there were no alternatives. The idea that you might have leverage, that someone from the manor might actually need you more than you need them, is hard to process. But it's true. You can see it in the steward's eyes. He's scared. Not of you exactly, but of what happens if all the peasants leave. If there's no one to plant the crops and tend the livestock and do the 1,000 tasks that keep an estate running. The Lord needs workers, and there aren't enough workers to go around anymore. The other survivors pick up on this too. Old Walter, who's been a serf his whole life, who's never had any choice about anything, looks at the steward with something that might be contempt. Gilbert's widow asks pointed questions about exactly what freedoms are being offered. Bess just stands with her arms crossed, letting the silence stretch out, making the steward uncomfortable. You don't commit to anything. Neither do the others. You tell the steward you'll think about it, and he rides away looking dissatisfied. His guards glance back nervously as they go, as if they expect the peasants to chase them down the road. That night, you lie awake thinking about what this means. The plague killed half the people in your village. It killed half the people everywhere, probably, which means that everywhere, lords and landowners are facing the same problem. Too much land, not enough people to work it. For the first time in generations, maybe the first time ever, people like you have a choice. You can stay or you can go. You can demand better conditions or you can walk away. The world that existed before the plague, the world where peasants were bound to the land and had to accept whatever crumbs their lords threw them, that world is dying. Something new is being born in its place. You're not sure what that new world will look like. You're not sure if it will be better or worse or just different. But you know that nothing will ever be the same. Spring comes slowly. The snow melts, the frozen earth softens. The days grow warm enough that you don't need to keep the fire burning all the time. Mary starts playing outside again, running through the muddy paths, chasing the chickens that somehow survived the winter. You start thinking about planting. The fields that belong to your family are still there, waiting. The soil doesn't care that half the world has died. It doesn't care about your grief or your fears or your exhaustion. It just waits for the plough and the seed and the rain. You're not sure you have the strength to work the land alone. You're not sure you have the knowledge. Agnes handled so much of this. She knew when to plant and when to harvest, what crops would grow best in which fields, how to rotate them to keep the soil healthy. You were always the muscle. She was the brain. But you have to try. For Mary, for the future, for whatever comes next. Bess offers to help. She says her cottage is too quiet now, too full of ghosts. She needs something to do, something to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. You accept her offer gratefully. Together, you start preparing the fields, clearing the dead growth from last year, turning the soil, getting ready for a planting season that will look nothing like any that came before. Mary watches you work. Sometimes she tries to help, carrying small buckets of water or pulling weeds that are taller than she is. She doesn't understand why her father and Bess are working so hard. She doesn't understand the importance of the harvest, the difference between having food and not having food. But she's learning. Every day, she's learning. The first green shoots appear in late March, tiny and fragile, pushing up through the brown earth. You kneel in the field and look at them, and feel something you haven't felt in a very long time. Hope. Real hope. The kind that isn't just the absence of despair, but something positive and growing. Life goes on. That's what you're learning. Even after the worst thing imaginable happens, even after the world ends, life goes on. The seasons turn. The crops grow. Children play and laugh and ask questions about everything. People fall in love and have babies and build new lives from the ashes of the old. You think about Agnes. You think about her every day, actually, but the thoughts are changing. They used to be sharp and painful, like a knife in your chest. Now, they're softer, gentler. You remember her smile, her laugh, the way she used to hum while she worked, the way she looked at Mary with such fierce, protective love. She would want you to be happy. You know that. She would want you to keep living, not just surviving. To find joy where you can, even in a world that has been broken and remade. You're not there yet. But maybe someday. Maybe. The nights are getting shorter now. Warmer. You can sit outside after dark without shivering, watching the stars emerge one by one in the deepening sky. Mary falls asleep earlier, tired from her adventures, and you have a few quiet hours to yourself. You use them to think, to plan, to imagine what the future might hold. It's not a habit you had before the plague. Back then, you knew what your life would look like. Work the land, raise your children, grow old, die. The same pattern your father followed, and his father before him. No surprises, no changes, no need to think about tomorrow, because tomorrow would be just like today. Now, everything is uncertain. Everything is possible. The old rules don't apply anymore. The old limits have been lifted. You can stay in this village, or you can leave. You can work this land, or you can find something else. You can be whoever you want to be, because the world that told you who you had to be is gone. It's terrifying. It's exhilarating. It's both at once. Mary stirs in her sleep, and you go inside to check on her. She's fine, just dreaming. You smooth the hair back from her forehead and whisper that you love her, that everything is going to be okay. You're not sure if that's true, but you want to believe it, and maybe wanting to believe is enough. Outside, the spring night is full of sounds. Crickets starting up, frogs in the pond, an owl hunting somewhere in the darkness. Normal sounds, living sounds, the world coming back to life after a long, terrible winter. You lie down beside your daughter and close your eyes. Tomorrow there will be work to do, fields to tend, a life to build. But tonight, you rest. Tonight, you let yourself believe that the worst is behind you. And for the first time in months, you sleep without dreaming of the dead. Summer comes slowly to a world that has been through so much. The days grow long and warm. The fields that you and Bess planted in spring are thick with green now, the wheat and barley rising toward the sun. It looks like it's going to be a good harvest. Not as good as it would have been if you'd planted all the fields, if there had been enough people to work them, but good enough. Enough to get you through another year. Mary spends her days outside, playing in the sunshine. She's grown since winter, taller, stronger. Her cheeks have filled out again now that food is more plentiful. She runs through the village with energy you'd forgotten children could have, chasing butterflies and picking wildflowers and asking questions about everything she sees. Why is the sky blue? Where do clouds come from? What makes the wheat grow? Why do chickens lay eggs? You answer as best you can, though half the time you're making things up because you don't actually know. Mary doesn't seem to mind. She just likes having someone to ask. Bess has become a fixture in your life. Not in a romantic way, not yet, though you've noticed the other survivors giving you knowing looks. She's just there, helping with the work, sharing meals, keeping Mary company when you need to be in the fields. She lost her family too, and working together seems to help both of you. It fills the silence. It makes the days feel less empty. Sometimes you catch yourself watching her. The way she moves, efficient and practical. The way she talks to Mary, patient and kind. The way she laughs at something your daughter says. A real laugh that you haven't heard from anyone in months. Agnes would have liked her. You think about that sometimes. Agnes would have wanted you to have help, to have company, to not face all this alone. She would have approved of Bess. But you're not ready for anything more than friendship. Maybe you never will be. The wound of losing Agnes is still there, even if it's not bleeding anymore. You carry it with you like a stone in your pocket, a weight that never quite goes away. New people arrive in June. 3 families from a village to the north. Their village was hit even harder than yours, they say. Only a handful of survivors, not enough to make a community. So they left, packed up what little they had and walked south, looking for somewhere better. Somewhere with land that needed working and people who would take them in. You watch them approach from the fields. A man and woman with 2 children. An old woman who walks with a limp. A young man travelling alone, his face weathered and tired. They stand at the edge of the village, uncertain, waiting to see if they're welcome. Part of you wants to turn them away. These are strangers, outsiders, people you don't know and have no reason to trust. The old instincts of a world where resources were scarce and competition was fierce. But another part of you remembers what the steward said. There's more land than people now, more work than hands to do it. These strangers aren't competition, they're help. The survivors gather to discuss it. Old Walter says they should be cautious. He remembers other times when strangers came and caused trouble, though those times seem impossibly distant now. Gilbert's widow says they should be generous. She says that turning away people in need is a sin, and they've seen enough sin lately. Bess says they should remember that they were all strangers once, that their own ancestors came to this land from somewhere else. In the end, you vote to let them stay. You assign them one of the empty cottages, the one that belonged to a family that died in September. It feels strange, putting new people in a dead family's home. But the dead don't need houses anymore, and the living do. You give the newcomers some of your seed grain and show them which fields they can work. The land is good, you tell them. It will produce well if they treat it right. You welcome them into your broken little community. The newcomers are grateful. The man with the 2 children, whose name is Hugh, shakes your hand and thanks you more times than you can count. His wife, a thin woman named Marjorie, cries when she sees the cottage. She says it's been weeks since they had a roof over their heads, weeks of sleeping in barns and under hedges, not knowing where they would end up. Their children, a boy and a girl about Mary's age, are quiet and watchful. They've seen too much for children so young. But within a few days, Mary has drawn them out of their shells. You see them playing together in the fields, running and laughing, doing what children do when adults stop watching. Hugh says he'll work hard. He says he won't let you down. He says God will bless you for your kindness. You're not sure about God anymore, but you tell Hugh he's welcome, and you mean it. The steward comes back in July. He's less confident this time. Word has spread that peasants in other areas are demanding better terms, that some are leaving their lords entirely, that the old order is crumbling faster than anyone expected. He offers more than he offered before. Lower rents, longer leases, the right to leave if you find better opportunities elsewhere. Things that your father would have considered impossible dreams. You and the other survivors negotiate. It feels strange, this back and forth with someone who represents the Lord. Strange to have opinions that matter, to make demands that are taken seriously. But you do it anyway. You push for more, and you get some of it. Not all, but enough. By the time the steward leaves, you have terms that would have seemed like fantasy a year ago. You're still bound to the land in some ways, still obligated to the Lord in others, but the chains are looser now. The future is more open. August brings the harvest. You work from dawn until dark, cutting the wheat and binding it into sheaves. The scythe swings in a rhythm that your body remembers even when your mind wanders. Back and forth, back and forth. The golden stalks falling in neat rows. The smell of cut grain fills the air, sweet and dusty, mixing with the smell of your own sweat. Hugh works beside you, and his oldest son, who's maybe 12. The boy is strong for his age, eager to prove himself useful. Bess works too, gathering what you cut, stacking it in the cart. Even the old woman who came with the newcomers, whose name is Joan, helps where she can, sorting the good grain from the bad. Mary tries to help, but she's too small for the real work, so she brings water instead, toddling through the stubble with a wooden cup that she refills at the stream. She takes her job seriously, delivering water to each worker with a solemn expression, like she's doing the most important task in the world. Maybe she is. It's hard work, back-breaking work. Your hands blister, then callous over. Your back aches from bending. The sun beats down and the sweat runs into your eyes, and your muscles burn with the effort of swinging the scythe hour after hour. But it's good work too, productive work. The kind of work that leaves you so exhausted at the end of the day that you fall asleep the moment you lie down. And the kind of work that means something. The harvest is smaller than it would have been before the plague. Of course it is. There are fewer fields planted, fewer hands to tend them. But it's still a harvest, still food that will get you through the winter, still proof that life goes on, that the world keeps turning, that survival is possible even after the worst happens. You watch the grain pile up in the barn and feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Satisfaction, pride, the simple pleasure of work well done. When the last sheaf comes in, you do something your village has always done. You save a small bundle of wheat and tie it into the shape of a woman. The corn dolly, they call it, a symbol of the harvest spirit, meant to be kept through the winter and ploughed back into the field come spring. It's an old tradition, older than the church probably, and Father John would say it's pagan nonsense. But you do it anyway. After everything that's happened, you'll take whatever luck you can get. Mary celebrates the harvest in her own way. She makes crowns out of wheat stalks and places them on everyone's heads. She dances around the barn, singing songs that she invents on the spot, her voice high and clear in the August evening. She makes you all laugh, which feels like a miracle. Children are resilient. That's what you're learning. They bend where adults break. They forget what adults remember. Mary still asks about her mother sometimes, still cries on the bad nights. But she's also learning to be happy again, learning to find joy in small things, learning to live. You wish you could do the same. September marks 1 year since Agnes died. You don't know the exact date, lost track somewhere in the blur of those terrible weeks, but it was around this time. You go to her grave on a clear morning, while Mary is still asleep, and you sit in the grass and talk to her. You tell her about Mary, about how tall she's gotten, how many words she knows now, how she's learning to sew with Bess's help. You tell her about the harvest, about the newcomers, about the strange new world that's emerging from the ashes of the old one. You tell her you miss her, that you'll always miss her, that there's a hole in your life where she used to be, and it will never be completely filled. But you also tell her that you're okay, that Mary is okay, that you're going to make it. You hope she can hear you. You hope she's somewhere peaceful, somewhere without pain or fear. You hope she's proud of you, of the way you've carried on, of the father you're trying to be. When you get back to the cottage, Mary is awake. Bess has made breakfast. They're sitting at the table, laughing about something, and when you come through the door, they look up at you with such warmth that it almost breaks you. This is your life now, this small, fragile, precious thing, built from the wreckage of what came before. The autumn evenings are gentle. The heat of summer fades into something softer. The leaves begin to turn, gold and red and orange, painting the world in colours that seem almost too beautiful after everything you've been through. You sit outside after dinner sometimes, watching the sun go down. Mary curls up in your lap, drowsy from the day, her weight warm and reassuring against your chest. Bess sits nearby, mending clothes or shelling beans, the two of you talking quietly about nothing in particular. These are good moments, small, ordinary, easily overlooked, but you've learned not to overlook them anymore. You've learned that small moments are all anyone ever really has. The plague taught you that. The plague taught everyone that. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is guaranteed. The world can change in an instant, can end in an instant, and all you can do is hold on to what you have while you have it. So you hold on. To Mary. To this life you're building. To the hope that tomorrow will be better than today. New travellers pass through the village occasionally. Merchants looking for trade. Pilgrims on their way to some distant shrine. People just wandering, trying to find their place in a world that doesn't make sense anymore. They bring news from other places. Stories of villages wiped out entirely. Stories of cities that lost 2/3 of their population. Stories of lords who died alongside their peasants. Of great houses fallen. Of fortunes destroyed. The plague didn't discriminate. It took rich and poor alike. But they also bring news of recovery, of fields being planted again, of markets reopening, of life slowly, painfully, returning to something like normal. The world is healing, they say. It will never be what it was, but it's healing. You believe them. You have to believe them. Mary falls asleep in your arms as the stars come out. You carry her inside and lay her in bed, tucking the blanket around her small body, watching her breathe for a moment before you leave. Bess is still outside when you come back. She's looking up at the sky, at the stars wheeling overhead. The same stars that have watched humanity struggle and suffer and survive for thousands of years. She says something about how strange it is, that the stars don't change, that everything down here can fall apart, everyone can die, and the stars just keep shining. They don't care about plagues or death or grief. They're just there. You tell her maybe that's comforting. Maybe it's nice to know that some things are permanent, even if we're not. She laughs softly, says you sound like a philosopher. You say you're just a farmer who thinks too much. She says that's not a bad thing to be. You sit together in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen. The sounds of autumn surround you. Crickets, wind in the trees, the distant bark of a dog from Hugh's cottage, where his children have adopted a stray that wandered in last week. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the sounds of a world that's still alive, still turning, still worth living in. You think about everything that's happened, the plague, the death, the fear and grief and despair, the long winter when survival seemed impossible, the spring when hope returned, the summer when you proved you could go on. It's been a year, a whole year since the sickness arrived, a whole year since your world ended and began again. You're tired, not just physically, though your body aches from the harvest, tired in your soul, tired from carrying so much for so long, tired from holding everything together when everything wanted to fall apart. But it's a different kind of tired now, a peaceful tired, the tiredness of someone who has done what needed to be done and can finally rest. Tomorrow will bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless struggle to survive in a world that offers no guarantees. But tomorrow is tomorrow. Tonight, you can just be here, just breathe, just exist. Bess says goodnight and goes to her cottage. You stay outside a little longer, letting the cool air wash over you, letting the quiet settle into your bones. Then you go inside. You check on Mary, still sleeping peacefully. You lie down in your bed, the same bed you shared with Agnes, the bed that holds so many memories. You close your eyes. The sounds of night filter through the walls, gentle sounds, safe sounds. And slowly, gently, sleep takes you. Years pass. They have a way of doing that. It's 1353 now, 5 years since the plague first arrived, 5 years since the world you knew came apart, and something else took its place. Mary is 9 years old. She's tall for her age, with her mother's grey eyes and your stubborn chin. She can read a little, taught by a travelling friar who passed through last spring. She can sew better than you never could, taught by Bess, who is patient with her in ways you never learned to be. She can work the fields alongside you now, not just bringing water but actually helping with the planting and the weeding and the harvest. She doesn't remember much about the plague years. She was too young. Sometimes she asks about her mother, and you tell her stories. The way Agnes laughed. The songs she used to sing while she worked. The way she could make anything grow, could coax life out of the most stubborn soil. Mary listens with that serious expression of hers, trying to hold on to someone she barely knew. You've told her about the plague too. Not everything, not the worst parts, but enough that she understands what happened, why so many cottages in the village are still empty, why there are so few old people around, why the world she's growing up in is so different from the one you grew up in. She asked once why God let it happen. You didn't have an answer. You still don't. Some questions don't have answers, or at least not answers that make any sense. You told her that, and she nodded like she understood, though she probably didn't. Maybe nobody does. Bess became your wife 2 years ago. It happened slowly, naturally. The way things happen when two people are thrown together by circumstance and find they fit. You didn't fall in love the way you fell in love with Agnes, all at once, like stepping off a cliff. It was more like a tide coming in, gradual, inevitable. One day you woke up and realized that she was part of your life in a way that went beyond friendship, beyond convenience. And when you asked her to marry you, she said yes, like she'd been waiting for you to ask. The wedding was small, just the village gathered in the churchyard. No priest, because there still isn't one. Just words spoken under the open sky, and witnessed by everyone who survived. Mary was there, holding flowers she'd picked herself, looking both happy and sad at the same time. You understood that feeling. You felt it too. Bess is a good wife, a good mother to Mary, in the way that a stepmother can be. She doesn't try to replace Agnes. She knows better than that. She just fills the spaces that need filling, offers the help that needs offering, and loves your daughter in her own quiet way. You're not the same person you were before the plague. Nobody is. Something changed in you during those terrible months. Something fundamental. You're harder now in some ways, more practical, less willing to trust in things you can't see or touch. The easy faith of your youth, the assumption that God had a plan and everything happened for a reason, that's gone. It died with Agnes. It died with Father Edmund. It died with all the people you watched suffer and pray and die anyway. But you're also gentler in other ways, more aware of how precious everything is, more grateful for the small things. A warm meal, a clear morning, your daughter's laughter. These used to be background noise, things you took for granted because they were always there. Now you notice them. Now you hold on to them. The village has grown a little since those first dark years. New families have arrived, drawn by the promise of empty land and better terms. There are maybe 40 people here now. Not as many as before, not even half. But enough to feel like a community again. Enough to have arguments and celebrations and all the small dramas that make up human life. The church has a new priest, a young man named Father John, sent by the bishop last year, fresh from his training and full of nervous energy. He preaches about sin and redemption, about the plague being a lesson from God, about the importance of faith in dark times. The older survivors listen politely and say nothing. They've seen things that Father John can only imagine. They've learned lessons he's never had to learn. But the children listen with wide eyes. The newcomers listen with genuine attention. And maybe that's enough. Maybe faith is for the people who haven't had it broken yet, and the rest of us just pretend for their sake. The world beyond your village has changed too. Word comes through travellers and merchants, stories from the cities and the great estates. Everywhere, the same pattern. Too few workers, too much land. Lords competing for labourers, offering better wages, better conditions. peasants leaving their villages and finding work elsewhere, something that would have been unthinkable before the plague. The old order, the rigid hierarchy that kept everyone in their place for generations, is cracking and crumbling and falling apart. Some lords are trying to fight it. The king passed a law a few years back, something called the Statute of Labourers, trying to freeze wages at what they were before the plague, trying to force peasants to stay where they were born, to accept the old terms, to pretend that nothing had changed. It's not working. The law exists, but nobody can enforce it. There aren't enough officials, enough courts, enough prisons. And the peasants know their power now. They know that their labour is valuable, that lords need them more than they need lords. They're not going back to the old ways. Not ever. You've benefited from this, in your small way. The terms you negotiated with the steward have held. Your rent is lower than your father's was. Your obligations are lighter. You have freedoms that your grandfather would have considered impossible dreams. A peasant who can leave his land if he wants to. A peasant who can negotiate his own terms. A peasant who matters. It doesn't make up for everything you lost. Nothing could make up for that. But it's something. It's a future that looks different from the past. And sometimes, different is enough. The autumn evening is cool and quiet. You're sitting outside your cottage, watching the sun go down. The sky is painted in oranges and reds, the trees dark silhouettes against the fading light. Somewhere in the village, someone is playing a pipe, a simple tune that drifts through the air like smoke. Mary is inside with Bess, helping with dinner. You can hear them talking, the low murmur of voices, the occasional laugh. Normal sounds, family sounds, the sounds of a life that you built from nothing, from ashes and grief and stubborn refusal to give up. You think about Agnes. You still think about her every day, though the thoughts are softer now, more like memories than wounds. You can remember her face without crying. You can say her name without your voice breaking. She's part of you still, will always be part of you. But she doesn't hurt the way she used to. You hope she would be proud of you, proud of the father you've become, the husband, the man. Proud of the way you kept going when giving up would have been so much easier. Proud of Mary, who's growing up strong and curious and kind. You think she would be. The world that existed before the plague is gone. Really gone, in ways that go beyond the death toll. The confidence of that era, the sense that civilization was solid and permanent and protected by God himself, that's been shattered. People are more cynical now, more questioning, more aware of how quickly everything can fall apart. You see it in the art that travelling merchants bring through, paintings and carvings that would have been unthinkable before, skeletons dancing with kings and popes and peasants, the dance of death, they call it, a reminder that death comes for everyone, rich and poor alike, that no one escapes, that the grave is the great equalizer. Before the plague, people didn't think about death this way. Or maybe they did, but they didn't dwell on it. Now it's everywhere, carved into church walls, painted on tavern signs, sung in children's songs that make you shudder when you hear them. The whole world has become obsessed with dying, with the certainty that everything ends, that nothing lasts. It's morbid, it's disturbing. But maybe it's also honest. Maybe pretending death doesn't exist was the real sickness, and the plague just forced everyone to see what was always true. But something new is growing in its place. Something harder and more resilient. A world where the old rules don't apply anymore, where people have to make their own meaning instead of accepting the one they were given. It's not a better world exactly. It's just different, changed by the fire that passed through it. You've seen death, real death, on a scale that nobody should ever have to see. You've held your wife while she died. You've buried friends and neighbours, and the priest who baptized your daughter. You've watched your community dissolve and rebuild and become something new. You've survived things that killed half the people around you, and you still don't know why. Maybe there is no why. Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe the plague wasn't a punishment or a test or a sign from God. Maybe it was just something that happened, terrible and meaningless. And the only meaning comes from what the survivors do with the time they have left. You're using your time to raise your daughter, to work your land, to love your wife, to be a good neighbour in a community that needs good neighbours. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that don't make it into history books or songs or stories. But maybe that's enough. Maybe the ordinary is enough. Maybe just living, just surviving, just being here when so many aren't. Maybe that's the whole point. The sun has set now. The stars are coming out, one by one. The same stars that have watched over humanity since the beginning of time. The same stars that watched the plague arrive and spread and kill, and eventually, finally, fade away. They don't care about human suffering. They don't care about anything. They're just there, eternal and indifferent, beautiful and cold. But you care. The people in your village care. Your daughter cares, even if she's too young to understand what she cares about. That's something. That's not nothing. Bess calls you inside for dinner. You stand up, stretch your aching back, and take one last look at the night sky. So much has been lost. So much has changed. The world will never be what it was before the plague, and the people who survived will carry the scars for the rest of their lives. Some scars are visible, most aren't, but they're all there, written into the fabric of who you are. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still living, still finding reasons to get up in the morning and do the work that needs doing, still holding on to the people you love and being held by them in return. That's what survival looks like, you've learned. Not triumph, not victory, just continuing, just going on, just refusing to let the darkness win, even when the darkness seems overwhelming. Especially then. You go inside. The cottage is warm, lit by firelight. Mary is setting the table, her movements careful and precise. Bess is stirring something in the pot, something that smells like home. They both look up when you enter, and you see the same thing in their eyes that you feel in your chest. Love. Simple and complicated and necessary. The thing that kept you alive when everything else was trying to kill you. You sit down at the table. Bess serves the food. Mary chatters about her day, about the butterfly she saw, about the song she's learning, about the dreams she had last night. You listen and nod and ask questions and feel, for this moment at least, like everything is going to be okay. Maybe it will be. Maybe it won't. You've learned not to count on anything, not to assume that tomorrow will look like today. The plague taught you that. Life taught you that. But you've also learned that uncertainty isn't the same as despair, that not knowing what's coming doesn't mean you can't hope for something good. So you hope. Quietly, carefully, like tending a small flame in a big wind. You hope that Mary will grow up healthy and happy. You hope that Bess will stay by your side. You hope that the community you've helped rebuild will continue to grow and thrive. You hope that the worst is really behind you, and if it's not, if something else comes, another plague or a famine or a war or any of the 1,000 disasters that can strike without warning, you'll face it. You'll survive it if you can. You'll help others survive it. You'll do what humans have always done when the world falls apart. You'll keep going. The fire crackles in the hearth. The food is warm and filling. Mary's voice rises and falls, telling some story about a frog she found by the stream. Bess laughs at something your daughter says, and you find yourself laughing too. A real laugh that comes from somewhere deep inside. This is your life now. This moment. This meal. These people. This is what you fought for, what you survived for, what you're still living for. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. Later, After the food is eaten and the dishes are cleared and Mary has been tucked into bed, you and Bess sit by the fire, not talking, just being together. The flames throw dancing shadows on the walls, and the wind whispers against the shutters, and somewhere outside an owl calls into the darkness. Peaceful sounds, safe sounds, the sounds of a world that has survived the worst and come out the other side. You wonder sometimes if anyone will remember. 100 years from now, 200, will anyone know what happened here? Will they know about the plague, about the death, about the people who lived and died in this small village? Or will it all be forgotten, just another tragedy swallowed by time? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the point isn't being remembered. Maybe the point is just living, just being here, in this moment, breathing and loving and surviving. The dead don't need monuments. They need the living to keep going, to build something worth having, to make sure their suffering meant something. You're doing that, or trying to anyway. Every day you get up and work and take care of your daughter and love your wife. You're doing that. Every ordinary moment is a victory. Every peaceful night is a gift. The fire burns lower. Bess yawns and says she's going to bed. You tell her you'll be there soon. She kisses your forehead and disappears into the darkness of the back room, and you're alone with the embers and your thoughts. You think about the future. Not your future, but the distant future. Hundreds of years from now. Will people remember what happened here? Will they know about the plague, about the death, about the way entire villages vanished in a matter of weeks? Maybe they'll read about it in books. Maybe they'll think of it as ancient history, something that happened long ago to people very different from themselves. Maybe they'll feel safe in their distance, protected by the centuries between then and now. But here's the thing about plagues. They come back. Not the same plague, maybe, but something. Disease doesn't care about progress or knowledge or all the things people build to feel safe. It just waits. And when the conditions are right, it returns. Someday, far in the future, people will face something like what you faced. Not the same, but similar enough. The fear, the isolation, the uncertainty, the terrible question of who will live and who will die. And when that day comes, maybe they'll think of you. Maybe they'll remember that people survived this before, that the world ended, and then it didn't, that even the worst disasters eventually pass, and the survivors carry on, building new lives from the ruins of the old. Maybe that's the real lesson. Not that bad things happen, everyone knows that, but that people endure, that they find ways to keep going even when everything falls apart, that survival is written into the human heart, deeper than fear, deeper than grief, deeper than anything. You hope they remember that, whoever they are, wherever they are, whenever they live. You hope they know they're not alone, that others have walked this path before them, that the darkness always ends, eventually, and the light always comes back. Tomorrow will bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless business of being alive. But tonight, right now, you can rest. You can let go of the weight you've been carrying for so long. You can close your eyes and trust that the world will still be there when you open them again. That's what the plague taught you, in the end. To hold on to what matters, to let go of what doesn't, to be grateful for every ordinary day, every simple meal, every moment of peace in a world that offers no guarantees. You stand up, you bank the fire for the night, you check on Mary one last time, watching her small chest rise and fall, listening to her soft breathing. She's dreaming about something. You hope it's something good. Then you go to bed. The sheets are cool against your skin, but they warm quickly. Bess shifts beside you, already half asleep, and you curve your body around hers. finding the comfortable position you've found 1,000 times before. The cottage is quiet. The village is quiet. The whole world seems quiet, holding its breath, waiting for whatever comes next. You close your eyes. You've survived the plague. You've buried your wife and rebuilt your life, and raised your daughter and found love again. You've seen the worst that humanity can face, and you've come through it. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but alive. Still here, still breathing, still human. And now, after everything, after all the fear and the grief and the long, hard work of survival, you can finally rest. The darkness wraps around you like a blanket. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts drift and fade, carried away on the current of sleep. Somewhere outside, the stars keep their silent watch. The seasons will turn. The years will pass. The world will change in ways you can't imagine, can't predict, can't control. But that's tomorrow's problem. That's the future's burden to bear. Tonight, you sleep. Tonight, you dream. Tonight you let go of everything and trust that the morning will come, the way it always has, the way it always will. And as consciousness fades and the soft dark takes you, there's one last thought, gentle as a whisper, warm as a fire on a cold night. You made it. You survived. And that's enough. That's always been enough. Sleep now. Rest. Let the story end, and the peace begin. Tomorrow the sun will rise, and life will continue, and the world will keep turning the way it's turned for 1,000 years, and will turn for 1,000 more. But for now, just for now, there's only this. Only the quiet. Only the dark.